time to address the elephant in the room. How am I going to handle Glitch Trap?
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host of the Toast, where I toast you to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's like we always do. I've been putting this one off for a bit because it's going to be a lot, but we simply, look, we're doing all these character studies, we're doing all the, what's all the lore of videos? We gotta do William Afton. And I think the longer I put it off, the more tricky it'll be to talk about anyone else. I kind of ran into this with Mike, where like a lot of Mike's actions only make sense when you know about William Afton. And we didn't in this series. So we simply gotta. You know, I'm realizing now that this series is very similar to my Making a Timeline series. Whereas that was me going over the timelines of every individual character. This is probably what I should have done first, which is just going over the lore itself and then touching on the timeline after. But you know, they go hand in hand is the only. There was another one like Kit and Caboodle or something. I don't know. They go hand in hand. Something in Parcel. I don't remember. But I should have done this one first. So I'm glad I am getting this done. Timeline this year maybe. I don't know. We'll see. It's one of those, like, it's such a big project that I haven't really had the time to dedicate to. But I'm getting it more and more time as we get more and more settled with the new schedule. So we'll see. But yeah, William Afton. What's his deal? So as I like to start with these, how do we know William Afton exists? Well, the first mention of his name we get is from Sister Location, where we get the phrase, "Those weren't the things we were talking about, Mr. Afton." Essentially, right? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The Silver Eyes came out December 17th, 2015, and Sister Location came out October 7th, 2016. Okay, so no. All right, interesting. So technically, the first time we ever hear William Afton's name is in The Silver Eyes, where we learn about William, and that he ran this restaurant with Henry Emily. Like, we learn all of this stuff. And then the very next game we see... That was the very next game, right? When did FNAF 4 come out? Yes, the very next game we see is Sister Location that opens with, "Those are the design features we had a question about, Mr. Afton." So to me, that's intentional, right? That's very much like, here's your setup, here's your resolution to it. So that makes sense to me. You know, let me start a document on my other page so I can write down some of this lore that we're going over. The lore, as Mad Pat would say. Willy lore. Willor Aftium. So how do we know he exists? Combination of how do we know he exists? Name first mentioned in The Silver Eyes as the antagonist who owned the restaurant and killed the kids. Plus, then in Sister Location, the very next game, it opens saying Mr. Afton. But it is noteworthy that Sister Location is one of the first like narrative heavy games that Scott released. It's the first one that really focuses on the primary story. I guess like I think primary story is a good way to say that, because the interesting thing about FNAF games you always have to remember is for the majority of them, the plot and the story are two very different things, right? The plot of the story, or the primary story of the game, is what we're actively doing. In FNAF 1, it's us being a security guard and surviving. That's the primary story. That is the main thing we're doing. For FNAF 1, right, the plot or the primary story is that you're just Michael Afton trying to survive Five Nights at Freddy's, the Freddy Fazbear's Location that was opened in the 90s. The story of FNAF 1, is the lore. The things we learned. The fact that there was 5 kids that were killed at the location. There was William Afton is, we don't really know about him in FNAF 1, but somebody was killing kids and maybe putting them into the suits. As the series goes on, we learn that, like, at the time, maybe Michael was being sent there by William. Maybe he was looking for William. Like, there's a lot of other things going on. And that's, like, the secondary story of FNAF 1. You don't need it to understand FNAF 1. But it colors the game. It adds depth to the world. Whereas in Sister Location is the first time where the primary story kind of is the lore. For the most part, it's still separate, right? For the most part, you can play Sister Location, know nothing about the lore, and realize, like, oh, I'm down here, and my being down here is a risk to my health. There are animatronics trying to kill me. Whoever you are dies at the end of the week. That much you can get, but that's very bare bones. For the primary story to make sense, you do need to know some lore, and it's lore that's told to you directly. The lore isn't as hidden in this game. There is still hidden lore, but that's where the secondary story comes in. The idea that, like, William Afton was maybe running FNAF 4 experiments. That's the secondary story. The stuff you find in the private office, stuff like that. Whereas the primary story that, like, we're playing as Michael Afton going down there to put together Elizabeth Afton, that's almost the text. You get the mini games where you get the child's voice speaking about, like, she was made for me, talking about Circus Baby. You get the if you beat all of Custom Night, which I would argue is more of hidden lore, but still, you get a straightforward monologue from Michael Afton being like, "Father, it's me, Michael." Like, it's a very this is the first, like, very narrative heavy game. So the fact that that's the first game where we get Mr. Afton said right after the books introduced us to William Afton, who's the owner and operator of Freddy Fazbear Pizza and did the missing child incident, I think it's safe to say William Afton exists. Now, to go as to, like, what his lore is, what evidence we have for him existing now that we know he exists, it's probably most useful to go game by game instead of chronologically, because chronologically you're just making a timeline, and there's going to be arguments for that. So just release-wise, FNAF 1, really the only mention of him we get is that the missing child incident happened. Right, this is still, like, when Scott is figuring out his story, figuring out what he wants to do, his players. So part of that was, like, FNAF 1 was a Hail Mary. FNAF 1 was not made in anticipation of becoming a decade-long series. So a lot of FNAF 1 is just, like, set dressing, And then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is where he starts to build off of that set dressing. So the idea of, like, what evidence in FNAF 1 do we have of William Afton existing? The MCI happened, the missing child incident. We get the newspaper clippings, and that's really it. But then, enter FNAF 2. So FNAF 2 introduces us to what many of us referred to for a very long time as the purple guy. So, for lack of a better term, since he was a pixel, not even real pixels, but like a pixelized style sprite of a man who looks purple. And we got a couple different variations. One of them was such a different color that people argued Pink Guy was a separate character. But we see this purple guy committing atrocities. He kills a child outside of a Freddy's. He does in Foxy Go Go Go. He kills 5 children. In Save Them, there's even more dead children. So whoever this guy is, he's a guy who's going around and killing people. And then we get the one FNAF 2 Save Them sprite, where it's William Afton, this purple guy with an outstretched hand and a yellow square on his chest, which would argue that he was a security guard working there at the time. Basically, we can attribute the death minigames to William Afton, and that he was working at the time of Save Them. Because of that badge, he was likely working at the time of Save Them, or at least had an employee uniform to put on to do Save Them with. And then there's the phone calls that we shouldn't forget. We see at the near the end of FNAF 2, there's that line where in one of the phone calls, he's like, one of the yellow suits in the back that you're not supposed to touch on the old ones. Someone to use them. Now all the animatronics aren't acting right. So for some reason, William used the likely it's William, used the Spring Bunny suit to achieve something at FNAF 2. FNAF 3, now we're getting somewhere. We got a lot of lore about William Afton in this one. So first of all, Springtrap and his creation. The idea of, like, at that point in the timeline of FNAF 3, William Afton is this body fused with an animatronic hybrid thing that needs to be taken care of. And in that same game, we get the Follow Me mini games, which shows us like the creation of William Afton in a way, or Springtrap rather, in a way, where William Afton was at what appears to be the FNAF 1 location, and he is one by one luring in and dismantling the Freddy's animatronics until eventually they're all nothing but parts. Then he's in the back room doing something when all of the spirits from those suits pretty much ambush him, and in fear, he puts on the Spring Bonnie suit, which was wet because of dilapidation, and it triggers killing him inside. Now, we also learn why he hasn't been around so much. And that's in the tapes that we hear in the FNAF 3 gameplay sections. After what seems to be the Michonne incident, the back rooms are all to be sealed up in every Freddy's location, painted over, and pretended they don't exist. So some people take this as to assume that he died before this happened, and finding him is what made them seal it. I don't think that's the case. I think what makes more sense here is that, you know, there was this safe room in FNAF 1, and the animatronics are stated to not be able to recognize the safe room. They cannot go in. They don't even clock it's there. So the idea that there is this, you know, broken into back room that William Afton is accessing, and he's using the fact that the animatronics can't follow him in to trick them to dismantle them, makes a lot of sense. So the question is, why didn't he just leave? Well, for one, we don't know how long it took for him to be able to walk. I mean, he's shambling through FNAF 3, it seems like. Well, no, that's not true. There is that one scene where he, like, books it in the office from one camera to another. So I guess he can move quickly when he wants to. But if you look at him in Help Wanted, he's, like, shambling around. So there's a chance that it just took a while to heal enough to be able to walk. There's another chance that, and now this is a lot of speculation, but it's the only way that makes sense to me. The idea that he like broke open the back room enough to squeeze into, so the animatronics, even if they went past programming, couldn't follow him in. Just another way to be safe. But now that he's an animatronic on the inside, he can't fit out through the opening he made. I think that is something that could make sense. Especially when you understand that the phone dude, the guy who's running the FNAF 3 location, found Springtrap behind what he called a false wall. So like either it was up and they knocked it down, or, you know, he saw one that was half broken and then saw Springtrap inside. There's a couple explanations for it, but yeah, so FNAF 3's main lore for William Afton is like, William Afton is now Springtrap, this is how he was made, this is why he was out of the narrative for so long. FNAF 4 lore. There's some lore, most of the lore of FNAF 4 is about the children of William Afton, but we know, if you are to assume that psychic friend Fredbear is William Afton speaking through a walkie-talkie, which I think the evidence in the next game makes a safe assumption, then, you know, we get the idea that William Afton is looking after the crying child, but trying to keep him away from the animatronics. And then we get the line, "I will put you back together," from that voice, which is possibly William Afton talking to the unconscious body of his son. And then there's the suit change cameo. There's a little Easter egg if you move correctly in one of the daytime minigames, where you see a purple guy putting the head of an animatronic onto somebody. So William Afton helping somebody get into a animatronic suit. But yeah, again, like most of the lore of FNAF 4 is about his children, not necessarily William himself. Now a big one. Like we mentioned earlier, sister location is massive for lore on the Aftons. I mean, right away, Circus Baby's Pizza World was a thing. / was going to be a thing. I'll save the reason why we know that for the next section with like the non-game lore that we can bring over. And then there's this massive sister location bunker. It was made under the house. A little side note that's always fun to mention. Afton needed investors to fund this venture. Basically, like the whole, like, those weren't the specifications we were asking about, Mr. Afton. Is him talking to essentially investors, being like, look, if you purchase this or if you fund this, I can make these amazing robots and you can make profit. You know, it's showing that like he's not a money sponge. He needs to get money from somewhere. He has investors, or he's trying to get them at least for circus babies. I'm sure it didn't go super well after the whole not opening the restaurant thing. We don't know the restaurant never opened yet. We know from blueprints that are found in this game that the animatronics are capable of kidnapping children. And from the monologue at the end of the game, we know that William sent Michael down to, quote, put her back together. And wherever William Afton is, I think we can interpret from the evidence directly in front of us that William Afton is not around by the time of sister location when Michael is going down there. Either I don't know if he fled or if he's springtrapped at this point in the timeline. It's hard to tell. But, Michael gets scooped, and his last words in the monologue are like, I'm going to come find you, Father. I'm going to come find you. Which to me is like, okay, so he's not just at the bunker being like, oh, welcome back, son. How was tonight? So if he has to go find William Afton fled. Now, did he flee because he saw Ennard wearing Michael and start to run? Possibly. There is like a moment. There's like a good, a week or so when it's Ennard wearing Michael's skin. And seemingly people don't notice until Michael starts to rot. But the idea of like, my son's coming back up in the elevator. I should see how it went. And then like this massive robot wearing the thinly stretched skin of Michael Afton just and William's just like, I'm staying down here. It didn't go well, I see. So there's a chance that he just saw it coming and hid. But this is also decent evidence for the idea that like William essentially said like, I need to go do something. If I don't come back, go to the cis location bunker. And then the thing William was going to do is like, follow me or something. There's a lot of ways to interpret it, but as far as like the direct evidence, William was not around by the time of sister location, at least physically. FNAF 6, we learn a lot more about other characters, but we do learn a lot about William Afton. We learn like some killing tactics of his, mainly in Fruity Maze, where we see the reflection of the little girl, and William Afton Spring Bonnie comes up and says like, oh, your dog didn't get run over. Follow me. I'll take you to your dog, and then leaves. That she dies, We also learn that like this is technically speculative, but I feel like most people agree that the mustard man from Midnight Motorist is William Afton. Whether you think it's the runaway is the crying child or Michael, that's a debate. But as far as like who the guy driving the car and coming home is, it's probably William. And because of that, we know that like at some point, coming back from somewhere, he like got mad at his child and said like, I'll make him regret it or something. And it's very, very likely, if not confirmed, that Midnight Motorist takes place right after Security Puppet, aka Midnight Motorist takes place the night of Charlotte's death. For a couple reasons. One, like it's raining in Security Puppet, it's raining in Midnight Motorist, and also I think the code, I forget what exactly it is, but something along the lines of like the code or the file name or something is like later that night. So it seems to be very implicative that this evidence is showing us William Afton does the Charlotte murder and then goes home and Midnight Motorist happens. And then as far as like the main lore we get, got lured by Henry and burnt to a crisp. The idea that like William Afton also, like many of our other characters, ends up in the FNAF 6 pizzeria, and once everyone's in, Henry shuts the doors and they all burn together. Now, this is a first. For pretty much every character we've talked about, FNAF 6 is their end point. FNAF 6 is like, okay, this character's story arc is over. But at least for Ultimate Custom Night, we have confirmation that William Afton's story isn't over. Ultimate Custom Night is the vengeful spirit torturing William Afton for all of time. So, it's William Afton being tortured for all of time. How do we know this? Like, what's the actual, like, evidence here? It comes down to a couple things. I think most damning is the fact that everyone's treating him like William Afton and saying things that would be mean towards William Afton. So that's one, stuff like I'm what you made me or shit like that. Like, that makes a lot of sense. But there is also the Old Man Consequences cutscene Easter egg, where if you get the Old Man Consequences Easter egg by setting everybody off and then Old Man Consequences like 1 or something, and then correctly do his minigame, you're transported to his lake. You can talk to Old Man Consequences. I think that closes your game or freezes it or something. And then you can go in the lake. I think that crashes the game too. But if you just hang around in the Old Man Consequences area, you hear a man screaming, Michael, Henry. Like, it. For a second, my brain said it was going to be Michael, don't leave me here. I'm like, no, that's the meme. Ultimate Custom Night, Michael, yell. Yeah, there's just like a man screaming, Mike, Henry, help. Mike, Henry, help. Mike, help. Henry, help. Like, it's just literally a guy just screaming for help. But if somebody's calling out for Michael Afton and Henry Emily for help, it's probably William Afton, right? If a grown man is yelling those two names, it's gotta be William Afton. So, as far as the Scott games go, William Afton is in, his story doesn't end at 6. This last Scott games game he is directly like lore relevant in is Ultimate Custom Night. Now, it's time to address the elephant in the room. How am I going to handle Glitch Trap? It seems very likely at this point that Glitch Trap is some form of a mimic program. Likely if not confirmed. So the question we have to tackle, the question we have to answer is, well, is it William at all? Is any of it William? Yeah. I would say, with the context of the full series, Glitch Trap, I don't think, has William Afton in it, in a spiritual sense. And the main reason for that is as far as we're aware, William Afton's body is at the bottom of FNAF 6. And Glitch Trap commands Vanny to use the animatronics to dig down and unearth FNAF 6 during security breach. So whatever they could have scanned to get William Afton himself to possess Glitch Trap would have been unearthed by Glitch Trap. So, like, you see the logic error here. I think what makes the most sense is that Glitch Trap is the mimic recreating William Afton from what it already knew about him and everything it learns in Help Wanted. So that being said, I don't think Help Wanted has any William Afton lore. That would be my argument, is that since it's the mimic, no Willy lore here. Then we gotta talk about security breach. Burn Trap is something that confuses and frightens me. So Burn Trap, I think it's safe to say that Burn Trap is William Afton. Because just call a spade, okay? We have a pizzeria that is likely, very likely, the same pizzeria we see in Secret of the Mimic that is reused and modified to become a trap that can burn people, for lack of a better word, that is underground at the security breach location. And then William Afton, in a rabbit animatronic suit, is captured and burned to a crisp. And then the next time we go to that same building, we see a corpse of a man inside of a rabbit animatronic that's burnt to a crisp. Sometimes the most likely answer is the right one. The question is, what the fuck is Burn Trap? I think what makes the most sense is that Burn Trap. Now, what does the evidence say about Burn Trap? Well, there's a rabbit suit at this same location, and we don't really get much about Burn Trap specifically, which I think is a big miss from the storytelling of Security Breach. And the story was mishandled for Security Breach. We all know this, but we really don't hear any. He's such a surprise to us that there's no build up to Burn Trap even existing, but he exists, and that's lore about him. I think the grander context, and this is more speculative, I think the grander context is that, like Michael Afton, he's possessed himself. Maybe it's just agony that remains and the remnant burned away in the fire. Who can say? But I also think, and this goes to Burntrap and the Vengeful Spirit, I think the blob is a manifestation of the agony of FNAF 6 and that fire. And when it sees Burntrap, it scoops him up and absorbs him. And that's why it kind of goes after him. But regardless, Burntrap exists, so William Afton in some way is still here. At least his agony is. What that means for the grander story, I don't know. But that's the evidence for William Afton's security breach, I would say. Help Wanted 2 gets a little tricky. There's not really any direct references besides just Glitch Trap. And at this point in the franchise, Glitch Trap could be possessed by or influenced by William Afton or his agony in some way. Another way, Burntrap existing and Glitch Trap being there could be crossover there. We're unsure. But I would say Help Wanted 2 doesn't have much direct. And then Secret of the Mimic, baby. We learned a lot about William Afton's business practices. And basically that, he wanted MCM and all of its stuff. So the moment MCM starts going under, he offers them this contract of make us a fake pizzeria and we'll fund you for the next couple years. It's we got to do this. And then William Afton keeps purposely fucking with the contract to extend it so they never get their payment. And as that's going on, he's actively poaching employees from Murray's Costume Manor by talking to the executive to get all of their contact information and being hey, I'll offer you a better job if you quit your job and bring your company secrets to me. And so he just single-handedly destroys MCM and knows about the Mimic. But as far as the lore of that game, that's all we really get, because it's more so about the Mimic and its creation, and we know Willie A is in the background. So the lore of William Afton, particularly the Mimic, is that he was a business leader back in the 70s, all the way back then. He sabotaged MCM and basically bought them up, and he knows about the Mimic. The only reason I say he knows about the Mimic is because Dispatch is hey, we know Edwin Murray built something they called a Mimic or whatever. So we know that Fazbear knows about it. Now you're starting to realize why I've been putting this one off, because we are this deep in and we've just touched the direct lore from the games. That's it. So let's move on to direct lore from outside of the games. The books are tricky to talk about because they're not the same continuity, but they are useful. I mean, like I mentioned, we get William Afton's name from the Silver Eyes, which is definitively not the same story as the games, but there's a lot of information that does overlap that is good to know about. So it's good to bring up. So the lore we get from the book trilogy. I'm going to make a second one. Bullet point trilogy. Lore. Like I mentioned, name William Afton. He does the MCI. I don't think we ever really get a motive for why he did the initial MCI. I don't remember if that's ever stated why. But he gets away with it. And then remains under a false name to watch over the location. He's basically came back to look for it because they built a mall around where his restaurant was. And it's tucked inside this mall in a back room somewhere. It's really weird. But some teenagers stumble upon it. And then the next night, the security guard, Dave, rolls up and he's why are you here? And then they explain oh, we're just looking around. Well, we're not breaking anything. And so it's do you want to come with? He goes, sure. And he walks in. Surprise, surprise, he knows how to work everything. And then he causes a mass panic with the animatronics and makes them start freaking out to go sneak off and find the old Spring Bonnie suit and then get up to his old shenanigans. He tries to grab a kid. I think they get him out, but he ends up keeping one of the kids. It's a whole thing. So he that's not important. The important thing is that as far as lore from this book, he was kind of looking for the restaurant to try to find the old Spring Bonnie suit. And the moment he does, he gets up to his old shenanigans. We learn that he is more comfortable in the suit than out of it. He's more comfortable playing the character of Spring Bonnie rather than being William Afton. And to the point where, like, you know, he dies here and gets spring locked, and then when he comes back as Springtrap in the next novel, he's like, I am Springtrap, more than William Afton ever was. It's like really over the top. The thing I love about William Afton is, as a villain, he is a theater kid trying his best to be what he thinks a cool villain is. And I think that's a really fun way to take your villain, is like, yes, he is intimidating, yes, he can kill people, but he's also like pathetic. And that's like a good trait. I like that writing quirk about William Afton. Because, like, you know, going along with the moral of the series, he is a small man. You know, like, he is not a good person. And this is kind of exemplary of that. But anyway, the more lore we get is that, at least by the time of the third novel, he has learned about Remnant and is extracting it to power the animatronics and to try to live forever. His main goal is to blow up and act like he don't know nobody. His main goal is to live forever, immortality, through Remnant and animatronic enhancement. Basically, he's afraid of death, and he's trying to live forever, which, like, mood. But he's doing it through siphoning the life force out of the kids he's murdered into his own body. Not great. Not a good look. And then, so that's like the main lore that I think is relevant to bring up of William Afton from the trilogy. One more thing. He's like obsessed with Henry. He has a whole journal where he would write about Henry, and it would flip-flop between, like, I hate him, he's the scum of the earth, he needs to die, and he's the most genius super inventor ever, and I need to be him. Like, he's obsessed with Henry. Fazbear Frights, the Man in Room 1280. That's the William Afton lore, and the Man in Room 1280 and the Stitch Wraith Singers. So, for those of you who don't know, there is a short story in Fazbear Frights called The Man in Room 1280, where this like burnt corpse that should be dead comes into a hospital and is alive, and they're trying to kill it because it needs to be put out of its misery. But every time they try to, some ghost stops them. So they call a priest, and he's examining it. He's like, oh yeah, this thing is evil, but he's able to get through to him, and the corpse is able to, like, with his finger spell in the air, like F-A-Z. He basically spells out Fazbear Warehouse Facility or something like that. So the priest, hoping maybe it'll help this soul move on, brings the corpse to a distribution warehouse filled with Fazbear merchandise. And the moment he brings him there, the corpse just explodes. Black goop over everything. Just explodes. And he's like, Sister Sancto, or some shit, you know? He's freaked out. And what we learn in the Stitch Wraith Singers is that was not only William Afton, but he did that to get his agony on all of those artifacts to continue living. Because once those artifacts are eventually collected by the Stitch Wraith, he forms into this conscious being of William Afton. He calls him, like, I am the agony. And it's this, like, big rabbit trash monster. And it's basically a way for him to come back to life, essentially. So how does that, why am I bringing this up? Is that relevant? I don't know if it's relevant. It seems very separate than what happens in the games. There was a case to be made that Fazbear Frights happens, like, in between FNAF 6 and Help Wanted, but I think it's unlikely, especially with stories like The Man in Room 1280, where, like, again, to be super clear, right? To be super clear, we have, in the games, in FNAF 6, William Afton's corpse is burned in a rabbit suit underground in a facility that's likely the same facility in Security Breach. And then in Security Breach, we go to that facility and there's a burnt corpse inside of a rabbit suit. Like, the explanation, if Fazbear Frights, specifically if Man in Room 1280 and Stitch Wraith Singers are in the game's continuity, the explanation is that it's a different building. The FNAF 6 is a separate building. There's a different fake pizzeria with a different underground maze burner thing that once they burned everyone alive, paramedics got to the scene, found a burnt alive William Afton that was, like, fused to a rabbit animatronic, took the animatronic pieces off of the body without killing it somehow, even though they're intertwined. Because, note, the corpse in the hospital, no animatronic parts. It's just a corpse. So either the animatronic suit fully melted off of him and his body remained, or the paramedics on the scene removed the animatronic pieces and brought the as if they wouldn't just bring the guy with the parts attached to him to the hospital. They removed the animatronic pieces at the scene, and then found this charred corpse and went, I think there's a pulse, and brought him to a hospital. And then everything happens, and then we get to security breach, and Glitchtrap is like, you need to go to this underground bunker. And we go down there to recreate the burnt corpse from 6. Like, okay, well, now we need a rabbit suit and a body to attach to each other and burn alive. And then, and there's burners down here. Like, there's rooms to burn people alive in. So this is definitely the FNAF 6 location. But, like, it's different. We got to fully recreate it. Or the third option is that it is the same building. Paramedics go to it. They pluck William Afton out. And then it later sinks into the ground. It wasn't underground originally. It sinks into the ground later for some reason. Gets built, like, paved over top from the Pizzaplex. And then Vanny and Glitchtrap go down there. And they are at the same building, but they still have to make a new corpse and then burn it. What are we talking about? What are we fucking talking about? Part of it, too, is that, and I've made this case, and I got dunked on Twitter, and it was very funny, but I made the case of, well, I think it's very likely that FNAF 6 had a front and then the maze. Because when you look in the FNAF 6 of Security Breach, we see the restaurant up top, and then you go down to the burner rooms in the maze. So my argument always was, FNAF 6 is up here on the ground level, underneath is the fake pizzeria with the maze and the burning stuff. That's where we have, the animatronics, the dangerous ones. That's where we're keeping them. And I made the argument that, like, the whole point of this is that Henry wants everyone to forget about Fazbear ever existing. So if it's already underground, who's coming to save them? If they're underground, and it's a fully encapsulated, like, burn tube, theoretically, especially if, like, he found a way to make the smoke stay in there, in that area, who coming to save them? There's it's a completely hidden away, like, it doesn't seem like the whole building went up in flames. We see the building in Security Breach. It looks mostly okay. So, and yeah, I got dunked on because people were like, paramedics, duh. But, like, I get it. But what I was trying to say was, like, the fire is so hidden away and so encapsulated. Even if you want to make the argument that William Afton gets plucked out, who's plucking him out? Who's coming to save only William Afton? I don't think it's plausible. I don't think it makes any sense. So, or at least, what do you think is more likely? Let me put it this way. What do you think is more likely? That William Afton is burnt alive inside of the Spring Bonnie suit, and then sometime later, maybe immediately after, because the fire was noticed by people and reported 911, paramedics get to the scene, they douse the fire, and they see that either there's a corpse who is breathing and the metal melted off of him, but his body remained, or finds this animatronic suit that, like, maybe there's a body in it. It looks like it's breathing. So they take all the pieces off to make sure that the body is okay and bring it to a hospital. Then all of Fazbear Fright's Stitch Wraith happens, and then Help Wanted comes around. The Mimic is like, hey, Vanny, we need to go find William. Then they go to the Pizzaplex. They dig down and they find the building, but William's been removed. Well, that can't be right, so we have to, mimic it. We'll recreate it. So we'll get a new body and put a new rabbit suit on him, and then we'll burn it with these burn rooms so it looks like William Afton, and then we'll put him in a container, and eventually, when he's done, we'll put Glitchtrap inside of him, and William Afton's back. Or, FNAF 6 burns, William Afton is burned alive in the rabbit suit, and then, like, 15 years later, Glitchtrap is like, well, I know that there's going to be stuff down there we want. So Vanny go down there, and they find in the same spot he got burned alive is a burned alive William Afton. Just saying. But we learned a lot about agony, so it's still worthwhile to bring up that as evidence. Other evidence to bring up, the sister location teaser. That's how we know that Circus Baby's Pizza World never opened. Essentially, the plan was to have Circus Baby's Pizza World open up, but then tragedy strikes. Elizabeth gets killed the day before it opens, and he cancels everything. The official statement was gas leaks, but, weird, obvious lie. And they pull back and they do Circus Baby's Party and Rental instead. So that's the lore we get from the teaser. So that's, hey, we're this deep in. That is just all the direct lore about William Afton. We've not gone about speculation. We've not gone over the timeline. We haven't answered any questions. And we're like 40 minutes in plus. I think this is a two-parter. I really do. So that's all of the definitive lore of William Afton. Now we'll move to speculation next week. As always, I didn't get to them today, but if you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. It's in the description, copy and paste, because it's a pain to type out. We'll continue this next week. So thank you again for visiting the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. I hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.